Hello, and welcome to another Glasshouse session. We're back after a short hiatus for the RSA Super Spreader event. We have with us a fairly full team. We were going to have a guest, but they canceled at the last minute. So we blame them as opposed to anything on our end. At least I've been assured that that's the case. We do have guests next week, which is going to be awesome. So yeah, we've got Silas, we've got Pablo, we've got Tanji, and we've got Dave and myself, Grug. There is a load of stuff that has happened this week. We're not doing the week before. We'll just assume that like nothing happened that week. It was RSA. There's like no news that happens then anyway. Cool. So the Chinese have done some quantum thing that has freaked the fuck out of the NSA. The Dutch intelligence burned a GRU agent to hell and back, and it's fucking hilarious. There's some paper by the Atlantic Council on cyber and blah, blah, blah. And I haven't read it yet. Dave has done a couple of videos, which I recommend that you see because they are great. They're on his YouTube channel. Be sure to like, subscribe, and cyber that bell. There's been some amusing stuff with the Army's like attempts to get like we'll talk about it, but the Army does something funny with cyber. Mike has good stuff to say, and I think probably the big one is the Indian police hacking the shit out of people, being evil, and that CPU frequency changing side channel attack thing that happened. So that's it. We've got a smorgasbord of things to discuss. I'd like to open with the one that Mike is going to like just knock out of the park quickly, and then we can move on to like other stuff because I'll forget about it otherwise, and it's fucking hilarious. So tell us about like this cyber commission and why it's a great idea that will finally solve the manpower problem.
Yes, so the Army's got all the services have a program for direct commissioning officers to work on cyber issues, and on the surface it makes perfect sense, right? Why wouldn't you take to run someone who is a subject matter expert in a niche thing through all the things to be in the Army, and then by the time they get there, a year or more has gone by, and they haven't done any cyber stuff. So you bring them directly in, and they do this with medical in the medical field with lawyers and that sort of thing. So it's not unusual. It's just the thing that's interesting about this program is one, just how rare it is. So in this particular case, it's the first Lieutenant Colonel or 05 brought into the program, and it's been going on for several years now. And to the best of my knowledge, they've converted, I believe, 4 NCOs into second lieutenants. So at this rate, they should be able to field a battalion by about 2057. So, but it speaks it's a shiny. It speaks to the short term small thinking about this problem. If you really have a a staffing problem, then you need to look at the staffing system, and you need to look at the personnel system, right? So like airline pilots, right? The military has rules. You have to have a certain amount of time in a certain situation before you reach a minimum retirement age, which cuts out probably just about everybody on this call, right? So, so the Army misses out on all of us. Doom on them. So you can bring on one lieutenant colonel and a major or two and a bunch of lieutenants and whatnot, and that fills gaps, but that doesn't. You have a mass problem, right? This is a military thing. Fire, maneuver, mass.
Wait, does the military like having lots of people for things? Like, is that a thing?
Yeah, it is. Oddly enough, you want to. Yeah, it's almost like trench or attrition warfare, right? It's like just throw throw people at them. No, that's that's a terrible joke. But you know, it's the shiny thing, right? Somebody got a medal for this, coming up with this idea, and you look at the time frame. It's like, this is not how you solve your personnel problems with the onesies and twosies. I take nothing away from anybody who's been selected. It's not a party to do this, and I'm sure it's arduous, and I don't question qualifications, but if you can count on one hand the number of people who have participated in this, is not addressing your staffing problem, right? If you
Without
can't,
using your thumb, by the way.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, with digits left over, right? So I mean, I was in the Army and I had a great time in the Army, and I wanted to succeed, but this is like the Army trying to do TQM in the early 90s, right?
You brought that back up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should. It's you know, it's just like somebody came up with this idea, and we'll apply this and it'll make us better. But it's like, I don't know if you understand what you're doing, but you're talking about the Army, right? Or the Navy or whatever. It's like TQM. Like, I'm sorry, you're not going to stop operations. You know, specialist duty bound is not going to stop operations because they see a flaw in a process, and then you're going to loop this whole thing back, correct it on the fly, and then move on, and you're going to be a bigger and better Army. It's just it's a fad, and I don't know. I don't want to put too much behind this and say that it's you know, it's just one more sign of how little respect that this field gets in any other discipline, right? You would never do this for pilots, right? You or any other discipline.
They should do it for mechanics. Like if you've been running a garage for like 5 years, like boom, you're a lieutenant. You know, I think that makes sense.
I've swept a lot of floors, so I should be able to run a motor pool. Yes.
Yeah. Can I pile in on that, Mike?
Yeah.
So first of all, you know, I'm going to do something I never do, which is I'm going to actually, you know, hat tip and say that somebody in DoD is doing something kind of right. So I'm going to hat tip the Army, because out of all of the services, they're the closest to taking cyber seriously. You know, I was a career Navy guy, and I got to tell you, they don't care about the mission. They care about the mission for funding. They don't care about the mission. And that is endemic in, you know, how many knowledgeable cyber people they've given command to, how many knowledgeable cyber people they've driven out of, you know, command. Anyway, so the Army, I think, is the closest to doing it right. The challenge is, even if they could do this in mass, let's say that they went out and they were going to get 10,000 of these direct commissions. They were going to, you know, clone Dave and make 10,000 Daves and put out a bunch of cyber clone troopers out there. The problem is that they're wearing the rank, but they're not going to be looked and treated as that rank.
That's exactly right.
You're going to have some infantry colonel or some artillery colonel that's going to go, you're not a real war fighter. I don't care. And you see that is actually built into the services. So you mentioned doctors and lawyers, right? So, you know, the reason they do that is so that, you know, when the doctor gives, you know, Private First Class Snuffy a profile going, hey, he can't PT for 2 weeks because he wrecked his ankle, that you don't have some, you know, knucklehead 03 going, I don't care, suck it up, buttercup, right? Now, where it's different is, you know, when I was running humanitarian or helping to run humanitarian efforts out of Haiti, and we were, as soon as we got on a small boat to go from the ship to the shore, that 06 medical officer fell under my command because I was a senior ranking warfare qualified officer, right? And so that's the other part that's missing. There are cases where we do treat specialists as specialists, and that is in the SOF community, right? So, you know, when you deal with a SOF team, right, yes, there are ranks, and yes, there is a team lead, but hey, if you're at the sniper part of the mission, the team sniper kind of has command, right? They're kind of, the team lead looks at them and goes, hey, here's the deal. What we fail to do is stand up a cyber force. We've got a space force, but no cyber force. I'll hand wave that for a minute. So, you know, one of the other ways to, One of the other ways to do this, hold on, Grok, let me get this one out and I'll give it to you to beat me up.
No, go for it.
We could actually treat cyber like SOF, right? We could make US Cyber Command, right, a global capability commander that man trains and equips. And so all the services go, here are our cyber bodies, right? They get provided to Cyber Command, who man trains and equips all of the cyber bodies the same way and gives the global component commanders functional forces. And if you did that, now you could bring in direct commission 05, 06s and go, you're my SOF team lead. And I think that would bypass that problem. All right, Grok, now tell me why I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. I think that, I mean, like my point is basically if they claim that cyber is a domain of war fighting, then why is there not a force to fight in that domain, right? You've got air, there's an air force. You've got like land, there's, you know, the army. You've got like the Navy, you've got the space, like if you think it's a real domain that is really where you fight, then you have a force that fights there.
So you would say, yeah, right. And what I will tell you is, and Mike can either pile in or tell me that I'm wrong, right? The military, right? Possible exception of the Space Force because they weren't around when I was still in uniform, right? But it's a knife and gun club, right? If you're not a kinetic warfighter, right? If you're not putting steel on target, they don't care. You're not looked at as a warfighter. That's just the bottom line.
And just general purpose military things, right? So I work in intelligence. It doesn't get to be more of an office job for the most part. But if you got 6 hours doing your job a day, that was a miracle, right? Because even working at the fort or working in a strategic assignment, if you got 6 or 7 hours of working your job, that was a miracle. You've got physical training, you've got some other sort of training, you've got some paperwork you have to do. There's always something that you have to do that has nothing to do with your job, right? Now pretend you're all of you who want to go in the service and you get to work, you actually get to be on keyboard for 6 hours. The rest of your day is doing fuck all with computers, right? How what kind of force are you feeling like that? So
I got to disagree with you there, and then we should probably move on to more current topics. Otherwise, we'll just kvetch about this all day. But yeah, that's true regardless of what your MOS or what your designator is in the military, right? If you're a pilot, you're going to spend the vast majority of time doing things other than flying, right? If you're an infantry officer, everybody's got to do their computer-based trainings. Everybody's got to do their admin for, their troops. Everybody's got to do the continuous education thing. So that's not the problem. I think the problem is that when you're a cyber Bubba, right, you get to do 1 out of 3 tours doing cyber, and then 2 out of 3 tours you're doing here's what you need to do that's not related to cyber so that you can promote. But that's a separate that's right. You have a hard time finding a cyber unit with a commanding officer that could tell you what TCP/IP stands for, right? They didn't come from this field. They're not educated in this field, right? And so when you're a junior mid-grade, officer, and you're looking at the boss going, that person doesn't look like me, I'm never going to get command. That's all I have to say.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, I want to move on to the Cisa Fellows program because I think it's a similar topic, but different, right? So, I mean, for those of you who aren't aware, Cisa launched during RSA a fellowship program where it's very similar to Industry 100. And honestly, I'm really happy they did this. I think it's a huge win. I don't know who's behind it, but good for them getting stuff done. I will say that it is 8 people. I think if I was going to improve it, I would sort of find some way to illustrate who's managing it and what the types of roles the fellows will have once they sort of enter Cisa a little bit more. I don't know if those have been fleshed out internally yet either.
I think though what we'll see is after this first round of it, we'll see some of those stories come out, and I think they'll be like those people that go through it are gonna not only have that experience of going through it, but they'll also be the ones that can talk about it and help them as
And
well figure out how to
ambassadors.
shake it.
I feel like there's I mean, like the Industry 100 program, in this program, you don't get paid and your company has to be comfortable with losing you for 1 day a week, which some parts of industry are going to be very confused about, and other parts of industry will completely understand, right? So, and maybe in some sense, the States works hard, right? Like, weirdly enough, the United States, I don't know if this is well known, but like you get like 1 day off a year, and like that's pretty typical. I know that Google offers 20% time. I know a lot of companies who would be very happy to have someone get this kind of experience in 20% of their time and would be happy to pay. But it's also something that needs communication and probably some education to other parts of, like, I think it would be great to have people from all parts of American industry enter this program, especially once it becomes like 64 people or 128 people instead of 8 people, right? So I think that's probably the other thing, is it's 8 people right now, which is like a very tight window. I almost don't know if 8 people gives you enough data to say if it succeeded or failed. And obviously I want it to succeed, but like,
the thing, though, is if you start with 100 people, that's a huge gamble, and it's going to be hard to manage it.
Yeah,
because you don't know you don't know what's going on most of the time. There's just too much variation stuff. 8 people, like, you could give them like 2 mentors each if you need to. Like, that is, you can make that work somehow. It's like
different
banging
sides of the same
head.
problem. Either way, I think these kinds of programs live and die off of management, right? Like, that's really like, as all internship fellowship style programs do. So anyway, that's out there. I don't know if I can think of like things that are wrong with it. I think it's great. Cisa's doing something great. I don't know who did this.
I
Good job,
think
person.
agree.
I think it's great. The other thing I would like to see is kind of the reciprocal of that, where people in government could go out and work in industry, right? There are those programs, it's called Skill Bridge, but that happens at the end of your career as you're transitioning from Mill and Gov to the civilian sector. It would be really great if you could do it earlier in your career and go, hey, here's something that Google or Twitter or whomever is doing really well that I can bring back to government.
That used to exist in telecom in particular.
It used to exist, and I don't believe it exists anymore. And I've got my own feelings on why that may or may not exist. It definitely wasn't very well supported. And Mike, you know how this is, right? It's when you work in government, we're all drastically undermanned, right? There's always more empty billets than there are full ones. And so leaving to go do something in industry is not something that is valued, right? It's well, you're escaping real work to go off and screw around and possibly find your next career. And that's a perspective that needs to change, right? If we're talking about public-private partnerships, right, that's not just private industry partnering with government, it's government partnering with private industry. And we need to be able to take the hit and take the body out of hide and go, hey, go out there and learn something from industry, go learn from Dragos, or go learn from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or a power plant or whatever, how they're doing things that we could bring back so that we can either take those things and do them inside of government, or go, this is a unique challenge that they have in industry that we don't have in government, and get better understanding. The other thing it does is it builds those professional bonds. It's much easier to call up a company, right, and go, hey, Silas, you remember me? I was there. I did that internship with you 6 months ago. I got this thing, right? When you have those personal relationships, it's a lot easier.
Absolutely. And even, it doesn't always have to be the big things that they bring back, but say like somebody from Cisa is to come and be embedded in a threat intel shop like Mandiant or CrowdStrike, like seeing how they're conducting their analysis and being like, holy shit, we're both bad at this. Let's figure out a solution together to make it better. Because there's always going to be things like that. But then there's also things like, oh shit, they do a morning stand-up. Why don't we do a morning stand-up? Like, the amount of meetings that we could reduce by having a stand-up and just pushing through something for 15 minutes, like, there's a lot of good opportunities.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think that brings us to the next topic, which is the Atlantic Council paper. Because frankly, there's a lot of things we could do better. Has everyone on this call read the Atlantic Council paper?
No, I haven't.
You haven't read the Atlantic Council paper, correct?
Loosely.
No, I had it on my list of things to get around to eventually, and
See, this is
I have such low respect for Atlantic Council as a cyber shop that, like, when they produce things, I'm not particularly interested.
Easy.
I am interested.
Ow.
There was
Ow.
also, I'm available if you want to hire me as a fellow. You could change that.
Gosh. But I think that's part of the problem, honestly, is that they don't get widely read by the community, but they do have influence in legislature, aka Congress, right? Like that's an issue. And when you're not getting any peer review, and you know, I don't think the authors in this particular case have a ton of industry experience as is. What you get is disjointed policy. So I think, first of all, I think it's important to read because it puts a line in the sand about where we are, like where legislature wants to go. And also where, like what the various stances of industry sort of groups are, right? Like there's some things in this paper that are just, frankly, just straight up calls for subsidies to random groups, which I find disgusting. Like, I think that's a very weird thing for policy papers to start always doing. It's like, please copy this subsidy requirement into some legislation as soon as possible. We should do that. That's a weird thing. I think it's at that level, you should be calling for increased resources sometimes, but it's very weird to say the US government should fund smaller companies to buy CrowdStrike, for example, or EDR or whatever it is. Like it's slightly more abstract, or antivirus is what they call it, I think. So that's like a weird thing in here, but there's also a lot of other weird stuff in there. I tried to call out a misunderstanding, I think, with the messaging that came out of DoD. So one of the things the paper does from the very beginning is assume DoD messaging is all defend forward is going to solve our problems. And that is not DoD messaging. Like DoD in no way wants to solve the world's security problems. That is not what they said they would do.
That's not their mission. Why would they ever do that? Like,
I don't know. So that's like an initial very large misunderstanding in this paper. And if you read the paper and you come away with a different perspective on what the paper is trying to say, then that's great. I did a very long review of the paper simply because I just can't believe we're still here. I can't believe we're still getting, like, at this level. Like, Atlantic Council is not like kindergarten, right? Like this is being read by some very important people. I can't believe we're getting this level of quality at this point. So anyway,
So
everyone should read it.
I did read your review on it, and I wanted to call out also the like point you made about how the paper encourages, like when they're talking about defend forward, the like proactively doing the botnet uninstalls and stuff like we saw last year with Hafnium. And I'll still ask, and because I'm still left with open questions from that incident, such as were for companies that did have the patch uninstalled and for places where the like USG proactively did those removals, did they
Not
notify
patch,
those?
you mean implant?
Yes, when they pulled the web shells off the
Yeah.
off the
You said
connectors.
patch.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Were those things communicated back to the private sector? Like, how was that handheld? And if we didn't do that work, why are we troping it as a massive success? And even still, did they evaluate what the full impact was from them conducting that operation? Because it's great to talk about the like we removed it and we believe we had an impact, but unless you've measured and verified it, do you actually know?
well, that, and like, have they followed up with those companies to find out like what they thought about being hacked by the FBI? Like if they were chill with that? Because
I mean, putting a sticker on the back of the FBI cars that say, how is my hacking, and like a number for them to report probably isn't the best mechanism for giving feedback, but
I think, look, there's a lot of questions there on one hand, and actually the paper legitimately is trying to make a point that a lot of defend forward is tough to message to your allies. And in some sense, this would mean, the industry that you're using, like that you're fighting through, right? Like, so there's a legitimate position hiding in this paper somewhere. And that's part of it, like, how do I communicate to the world at large that we're going to be very active, on their machines, right? Like on random.
Different from China because reasons.
Different from China because reasons. So I think there is a way to communicate that. And I think, unfortunately, we have to get better at this, better at the communication part of it too. And we have to get better at the technical part. And we have to explain it to our allies. Like, yes, the Germans and the rest of Europe and the rest of everywhere else is going to be annoyed that we've decided to go very active on places where we have no real interest to protect them, in a sense, right? Like, and to protect ourselves. That's what we're trying to say.
I mean, but the
OVH is going to be like owned by so many different, like, just OVH is, like it's the world's botnet C2. It's just going to get hacked back and forth by Cyber Command, like deleting shit all the time. And like the French are just going to have to learn to deal with it, because if they won't clean it, then we will. But
what about that as a strategy? What if legitimately a strategy was run where it's we're going to drop shells on your box, we're going to patch it, and we're going to walk off, and we'll leave you a receipt. Like,
I think that is where we should go. I'm a huge proponent of being a little bit more proactive. Like, I think that would have been better had we not removed implants, but installed patches.
Yeah.
Right. Like, do it ahead of time. Like, that would be great.
Right.
Like, because the thing also is these are going to become contested systems. And in a major event like WannaCry, host gets hit, host becomes then a super spreader event like RSA and begins burning stuff elsewhere. So unless you take out that infected system as well, and
I want to push back on that, because that would only work if the US government had access to Eternal Blue before the rest of the world. And
there's no way to know. Well, I think with the exchange event, it's a little bit of a race. So there's like operational skill sets you need to build before you get good at this.
You'd have to be ready to go for whichever bug comes out first, right? Like, you'd have to have your ops planned out for, like, if there's an exchange web shell thing, this is how we're going to patch it. If there's an exchange like RCE, this is how we're going to patch it. If there's like an Outlook RCE, this is how we're going to patch it. If there's, I don't know, like an Apache, like all of these things, you're going to have it all ready to go, because it's a race. You can't be like, hey, okay, so let's start the R&D team up and get ready to do this in the next 6 months or so.
I mean, but there's a lot of stuff already out there, and this is just gonna be, I need to shop before saying something like this, but like, imagine pushing just like straight up Ansible or something, and it's just doing those updates because it has all the built-in capabilities. Like, you don't need to maintain access. If you just drop and push something that's going to auto update -y.
Yeah, I think you're following the logic essentially to its normal conclusions, right? Eventually you get an FBI, agent on your box and it patches for you. That's the logic that you're getting.
I mean, we're definitely in a hypothetical and pretty far.
It's gonna make Pablo's brain explode.
But you jumped the shark now. and you're mixing things, right? So one thing is to go, hey, listen, US government knows about this thing because they had an O-Day, and now that it's being publicly released, they have the capabilities to patch it. Without putting myself in a place where I end up next to Eddie Snowden in a jail cell. I can tell you that those kind of public-private partnerships exist, right? That is separate from the legalities and the risk for a U.S. agency applying patches, because sometimes patches just go wrong, right? Sometimes patches don't break the software but break configurations, right? Deal with anybody that's had to deal with a cloud service provider that tells you 48 hours beforehand they're going to apply a patch, and then you realize that all of your controls are broken. right? So that's a separate thing. And then the last one is, right, the whole perception, particularly from a US perspective, right? Because we're all proud to be Americans, right? But we all have a healthy distrust of our government, right? Anybody remember the Clipper chip? It's like, yeah, no, I don't want the US government to have a backdoor into my thing. And I will tell you that when I was in government, we went to organizations, right? We went to organizations in the defense industrial base who get all of our money from DoD, right? And said, here is the conclusive proof that you have a nation state actor on your machines. We would like to help you clean it up. And their lawyers went, not just no, but hell no. Right. So there's the technical aspect. That's the easy aspect. There's the legal aspect and the perception aspect. And those are the ones that are, frankly, insurmountable at the current time.
And it gets a lot more complicated if you hit something that is not actually a US person's.
Yeah. If it's not a US entity, like, forget about it.
Right. Like, because if you accidentally patch like some French guy's box or like a German box, that's like, we're not saying like international incident, but like that's way over the fucking line.
Well, I mean, even let's go
It's just defending Ford. What are you talking about?
Well, so now we
Those are boxes that just need freedom.
So we apply patch on a foreign box, right? And maybe we inform the foreign government, right? And it turns out that patch also has a vulnerability. You're telling me that we're not going to be instantly accused of, well, you patched a hole, but you put in a backdoor so only you could get it.
Right.
Like, that's going to be the perception.
Well, there's that, and it's going to be even worse as well if you if you do install a patch that causes a problem, and it causes a business outage, right? It's going to be like, okay, so now the US is going around, they're taking down competitive businesses that they don't want to deal with, and they're just hacking them as part of their defend forward process. Is this like China's defend IP process? Is that what we're dealing with?
So is this the right time to talk about that new acquisition?
We should.
It's like the perfect trade. Silas, please.
Okay.
First swing.
I am absolutely thrilled to announce that that our dear friends at NSO Group have finally found a place where they can sustainably survive and enter the public market in a way in which they'll be a meaningful contributor to the security community by joining L3 Harris. I don't know how many different groups have issued warnings about this. The White House issued a warning. It's a spicy day.
Yeah. So, I think that the people who are upset about it are focusing on Pegasus a lot more than I think L3 Harris is. Like, my guess is that like Harris is looking at this team of exploit developers that made like that iOS font map bug that was like, its own like little state machine that like computed all the stuff. They're looking at that and going like, what do we have to pay to get this guy? Like, how do we get that team for us? And people are going like, oh my God, they're going to get like the contract to support Saudi Arabia, which, if that was a problem, the US could stop supporting Saudi Arabia anytime they wanted to. Just saying, like, that's an option too. But, focusing on technology, which is not very interesting. I mean, there might be bits of it that they want to steal for like an iOS backdoor, but I guarantee you that there's like existing iOS implants that the L3 people and their customers have that are far more capable than Pegasus and probably don't show up as easily. Like, I'm sure they could teach them a thing or two about how to do a proper implant. So like, I don't think that sort of business unit is going to stick around for very long, but I do think the exploit guys are going to get taken over. That's my feel on it. Okay, so apparently that's what everyone else thinks as well.
I don't agree that exploits are the sum of the value of the company NSO Group, assuming it has any value at this point, which may not be true. Like, it literally may only have value to L3 Harris. L3 Harris may, like, the White House was clear that like this does not get them off the entity list.
I mean,
but it doesn't not get them off. You know what I
It's
mean?
possible that it's just L3 Harris shopping around for new customers and looking to pick up their customer base and being like, you're using Pegasus. That's yesterday's shit.
Well, the other part is, the institutional knowledge, right? I mean, if they manage to acquire it and keep the talent, and that's a big if, the institutional knowledge is where the real value is.
They're
I
going to
think
make
there's a lot of
everyone
value.
stand ego. That's going to be their thing. And that's going to get everyone to like quit. They'll be like, look, we're going to shut down the Tel Aviv office.
Well,
Everyone has to be in the US now.
I don't know about that, but the way that normally happens, right? When companies get acquired, the people that make the money, they cash out and they go, right? And so typically when they get acquired, it's hey, listen, we'll acquire you, but you've got to stay on for 12 months, right? And at 10 months, they start packing up their desks. That's just the way it works in business.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, maybe just the Git repos is worth however many millions are going to pay.
So Dave, I'm curious because you said that there's a lot of value there. So that the exploits are one thing, that the products are one thing, right? Certainly there's name recognition and there's a client list, right? And then there's the talent, right? There's the organizational knowledge. Is there something that we're missing in the value? What are we missing there?
I mean, you're missing testing frameworks, which are a significant part of any like offensive team shop. Is how do you test?
Cyber range.
Yeah, it's
like
not.
You're gonna have cyber range. It's amazing.
It's fairly specialized as well, because this is not the same as the cyber range you're seeing everywhere else, right? Like a good testing framework isn't a humongous investment in any space. How do you? There's 1,000 million other things that go into this kind of business that you can build, and no doubt L3 Harris has versions of, but maybe not for every platform that and every situation that the NSO Group has. Like, so there's going to be other synergy.
I think there's two things to look at from that. So one of them is that you have an exploit developer who wrote that amazing exploit, right, for that iOS remote. And then you had a team that made it work on fucking everything. And that is probably far more impressive if you think about it. Like they had access to a load of hardware and a bunch of different versions, and they were able to make it work, not crash and all that. Like that required probably more effort than finding the bug and making it work. Like you can get to that point and then like making sure it's stable across different CPUs and stuff. I don't know.
And there's a bunch of like just boring database level work that goes into building some of these things that, so all of that's worth $0.00 right now on the open market to anyone who is not Harris, probably, right? Like it really doesn't matter. I think the only other team that could grab them and get value would be a Chinese team. And I really don't think that's the option that we want.
Well, with the Chinese, like the thing is, I think Harris is maybe the only team that could grab them and not get tainted in the process, right? Like if any Chinese company purchased them, the US would be like, okay, if you touched it, you are now also on the entities list because it's a transitive property. Like the entities list is contagious and you've touched it now. So you're like, I'm pretty sure that's the approach that they could take easily. Harris, I think, away with it.
It was very interesting because last night at like, 11 p.m. Pacific time, some Georgetown law people were very angry because they're like, we've pointed out the 100 companies that are supplying the Chinese military with AI tech, and you've only put 2 of them on the entity list, right? They had this huge tweet thread. And I'm like, yeah, the entity list doesn't scale up like an AWS contract does. You know what I'm saying? Like there are huge limits here. You can't just be like, we're putting every emerging technology on the entity list, or in Commerce Department, why have you even done anything? They were really angry.
If you build to have things on the entity list, right? If there was like AWS billing, like you could add as much shit as you like, but your costs would go up. So at some point you'd have to be like, how do we optimize? Like which groups do we no longer need to have on the entities list? Who can we drop to like save some budget?
It's not cost free. And we do
Yeah,
have an
metaphors
interest
here.
in having, in not having everyone at NSO Group just leave and start a new company of the same type, which I think is something we should have thought of when we started this process. So with
Maybe
that in
having a
mind, I
strategy
think,
other than something that was designed to work in the 80s or before then, even like the entities list is not like, it works well, I guess, for like missiles and like, you know, advanced satellite tech and all this stuff, but not necessarily so well for like a smart person who could literally start a company in their bedroom with a laptop and have like a serious impact. And if, you know, you put them on the entities list, there's like 100 other of them as well.
I mean, I've asked for a few years as well, like for an answer about Alyssa Esage's trainings. Like she was sanctioned with Zor's Labs or Exor Labs or however it was. Like, can I take her trainings even though she's no longer associated with them? Like, the rules have remained like vague for years.
I mean, deliberately ambiguous is another way to put it, right? Like, so I don't know that I think there is a real rule there. I don't know what the rule is, to be honest. And, but I also just think in general, like Rugg pointed to a separate issue, which is we don't know what the limits of entity list and export control are in general, because we don't want to ask. But there are limits. That's a real issue. Like if we actually did a study and said, you know, here's a bunch of things we put on the entity list. How did those companies do? What happened to the people? What happened to the technology? Did it have the effects we wanted? We would learn something possibly about when it was effective and when it wasn't effective. But we don't want to do that, because then we would have to say, okay, if it's not effective, why are we doing it in those cases? And then we would have to stop doing it, right? There's a lot of stuff we don't want to know in general, as applied to a lot of these policy like levers.
But when
like, you don't study them.
Yeah, but the thing is like, as sanctions is one of the kind of two sticks that we at least publicly admit to hitting back with. I mean, if you find out that your left arm doesn't work and you're thinking it does, like, that's something you do need to know, because if your strategies aren't effective for like actually causing impact, then you need to find others.
Yeah, that's true, Silas. That's true.
I don't know, I'm jumping in late, guys, at Pablo's behest. But I mean, I walked in right when you guys were discussing sort of L3 and the possibility of picking this up. I mean, to what extent, I'm not going to go full tinfoil hat and say that that's sort of the intent behind the naming. Of course not. Like that, we're not trying to pick up CoSync and like all these other organizations. But I feel like with this NSO situation, I've been surprised at finding a lot of commentary about how it's not just another vendor. It's not just another lawful intercept provider. I don't know if there just aren't that many folks that are genuinely talented in this way in the mobile space. If NSO is just king of iPhone hacking that way. But when it came to Hacking Team and Gamma Group and the other ones, we just let them kind of collapse and nobody gave a shit, right? There was always going to be another successor. When it comes to NSO, L3 suddenly popping up and being like, yeah, this is valuable enough, even this long after being put on the entities list, it's still valuable enough for us to take. I find that fascinating. I mean, it not only makes me wonder if they genuinely want this within sort of the Five Eyes fold, at the same level as an azimuth or a linchpin, but also like, what is it about NSO, or what is it about the iOS exploitation space that makes NSO seemingly irreplaceable?
They're different from the other ones you mentioned, which did not have their own exploit dev teams. Those only had the implant. So if they don't have a way to install, then they were nothing. And so that's different from NSO in that they always have a way to install, and they have a thing you can install. You know, like that's, I think you touched on a very interesting thing, which perception-wise, I think if you destroy a company by putting them on the blacklist, and then one of your defense contractors buys them to steal all of their talent. Like, I'm not saying that that's like some super dodgy stuff, but it definitely looks pretty fucking dodgy. I mean, like,
Is the talent still there?
Hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. I'm gonna throw a flag on that play, right? Because when you look at like Amazon, when you look at Facebook, when you look at Google, they have a long history of young upstart competitors that are going to compete with them and going, great, the easiest and cheapest way to solve this is to buy the company, right? But now because it's a defense contractor, now it's super shady. Come on.
Well,
come on,
yeah,
like,
I guess-
exploiting a monopoly position has always been shady, and you know the U.S. is obviously a monopoly on defense spending.
No,
like
but
there are
Greg,
monopolies.
I mean, to Pablo's point, right? If so, the difference here is the limits that come around with customers, right? Like presumably, I don't know, is Five Eyes, are any Five Eyes organizations legitimate NSO customers? Could they have been L3, you know, customers of some part of the L3 family and chose to go NSO? And I would flip that on its head and ask, well, in that case, does that mean that L3 is buying NSO along with its customer list and they're going to inherit the fucking toxic waste that is NSO's current customers? Because like, you're not talking about buying the IP, right? You're buying the company with its business agreements.
Yeah, but
Right,
you know,
which means that you could decide not to support certain customers anymore, right? You could just go, yeah, okay, we'll take the financial hit, right? So from that perspective, right, like, you know, looking at whether it's shady or not aside, it gets bought by U.S. defense contractor who wants to continue doing work for, you know, the U.S. Defense Department and the Five Eyes, and one of the requirements is, hey, you quit doing stuff for Syria or Libya.
Right.
Okay. It seems like a pretty effective way to make sure that this kind of capability stays out of the hands of people that we don't want to have the capability.
right. No, I see. I agree with you on that. Actually, is that if you are upset with NSO, then having NSO, or what I'm now calling L3 NSO,
I mean, but this could be the kickoff also for L3's entire cyber capability type like offering set. Like if they've got something that hasn't been working, immediately you pull in a batch of customers that you will already support. You chop off the ones that, you know, are monsters, and then push back forward.
And then you can appeal being on the entities list as well. You could be like, look, you know, we got this business unit got blackballed because they were selling to like these 5 people who are bad, or however many it is. We no longer support them as customers. Like, can we get that changed? And there's a yeah, there's a good chance that they would be able to do that then. So yeah, like if you want NSO to clean up their acts, like having them run by a US defense contractor is probably a good outcome.
But come on, look at the conversation that we're having. We never discuss having let's say again, hacking team clean up their act and like how do we keep this entity alive but straighten them out, right? And you know, and you made the point about the exploit developers. I agree, though I do wonder, you know, who's to say that you buy NSO and the 2 genius exploit devs who are just fucking coked out somewhere writing amazing iOS exploits all day don't leave, right? Like, what's to say that they don't just, you know?
But why should they leave?
I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't. I'm just saying.
No, I'm saying like there's an assumption that like as soon as as soon as there's an M&A event, everyone's going to ditch, and there's not really all that many places that they can go to. I mean, right? And keep doing the thing that they like to do. You know,
do they need to be places like I mean, and I feel like an idiot sort of like discussing what the O-Day market would look like to you because you know it 10 times better than I do. But if there's anything like a nomad worker in the infosec space, it's the exploit devs that get to fucking go wherever they want, write an exploit every once in a while, you know, make some decent money, and then like keep doing whatever it is they want to do.
Yeah, or they could be somewhere 9 to 5, getting paid $1 million a year to do what they love to do anyway, and they get like medical and dental and like, you know, all the other perks plus like a pension. So, you know, like
We're discussing the particulars of it.
Okay, look, they could, there are, if they haven't left just on their own to go and like be nomad bug devs, they're not necessarily going to do that just because they want to. They could have done that already. So in theory, they could be kept around, right? So there's no reason to assume that they're just going to leave for no reason at all. I think, you know, they probably don't get up in the morning and say like, how can I enable, you know, Saudi Arabia to kill more journalists? Like, what can I do today that's going to make that easier for them? So I don't think they're dedicated to like the NSO mission. I think they just want to write exploits.
Is that the NSO mission now? That's brutal. No, I agree with you. I'm just really curious about the dynamics that this entails. I mean, I don't have much visibility into L3 in general, right? Like when they picked up Azimuth, that's really when they came on my radar. They had Lynchpin as well. But the way that I've looked at them is like, well, here's like a genuine like Five Eyes provider picking up other Five Eyes providers and sort of creating this sort of agglomeration of Five Eye-ness. But I am fascinated by NSO.
We like to call that a high value target.
That's beyond my scope, but I'm just saying, like, there is definitely a change of flavor here, and I'm curious why that even has to happen, considering how we talk about these things normally, where there's just a wealth of availability. You know, NSO will go under, and we'll just get Citrox, and there's always someone about to kind of take up the mantle, but that's not the case here.
We're short on time, and since you're here, what I want to do is smoothly transfer over into talking about the Indian hacking case. So why don't you talk about that? By the way, this is what we call a segue.
I like how
Move like butter.
Just gone. Yeah, no, that's been pretty fascinating. To be honest with you, I've just been watching this nuclear explosion go down.
Poor use of term.
No, I mean, yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. I've just, you know, we worked on this report. We've continued to work on these things, and amazing credit to Andy Greenberg. I mean, Andy saw that we were moving forward with the talk for Black Hat, and he was like, man, I want to do a follow-up. Can I talk to some of your sources? Can I talk to some of the folks who were talking? I was like, yeah, absolutely. And in a total toss-up, like, we had a sense of attribution because an amazing threat intel, conscientious threat intel researcher at a really big provider hit us up and said, look, man, we've had this data, we've been tracking these folks, and we didn't really know what to do with it. But look, and it gave us a pretty clear and damning sense of attribution, but we couldn't really do much with it, right? Like, we're not going to get this person fired. We're also, to be perfectly frank, I don't know that as threat intel researchers we're in the position to be like, you know, picture, name, and phone number, right? Like, here you go, guys.
Not unless they're Chinese or Russian, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, look, I complained so much about that. What was it? What was the report, Silas? You remember the one with the Chinese operator, Green Sky?
Are you thinking of the one from
Camera Shy?
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, I bitched infinitely about the Camera Shy report. I'm not then subsequently going to turn around and profile the life of this Indian dev or Indian operator or whatever. But Andy figured it out. Andy sort of, you know, managed to thread the needle, got the source. I mean, some folks have reported that it's a whistleblower. It's not a whistleblower. Andy got the source through their lawyers to agree to provide the data, which in itself is, first of all, fucking amazing, right? Credit. I wish I could name this company because I wish other companies worked like they do and had a human rights department and had a bunch of lawyers who said, you know what, it's in our interest to actually put this data forward for the well-being of people. So I'm infinitely proud of that. But it's because Andy went and did it. So now we're just like, the fact that he could get that out there was amazing. And ever since, Tom Hagel and I have just sort of been watching with like these wide eyes being like, what the fuck is going to happen in India? I don't know, man. We're 2 days in and all I see is just this overwhelming set of support for it. but I've been waiting, where are the trolls? Where, what is the government's response? I'm definitely not going to go hang out in India anytime soon, and
I think you need to back up and give the audience context, right? Like you sort of jumped into this thing in the middle.
Right.
Who is it who did the hacking?
So we talked about this operation, this modified elephant thing, and how they had planted evidence in the machines of these activists, throw them in prison. In and of itself, that entails something very specific, right? Like if I hack Dave's machine and plant evidence on it, there is no cop that shows up tomorrow and checks his machine unless there's some level of coordination there. So there was never, I'm not going to say that there wasn't a mystery before, but there was always an implication that there was some level of conspiracy in that dynamic. What made it really interesting was to get this data from the email provider that said, well, actually, when they took over the accounts of some of the victims, they would, presumably as a means of maintaining access, they would add an email and phone number as a recovery email address to the accounts of these victims. And that email and phone number are like directly associated with a particular cop in that region, but like blatantly so. And then of course we didn't just take that for fact. I mean, Andy took it to John Scott Railton, who did his own verification. We took it to Sashan Assis, a friend of Dave's, who is a beast on the OSINT side and wrote like a 30-page profile on this dude. But just with the email and phone, like we didn't even give him the name, we didn't give him the context. We said, look, we have this email and phone number, go. And I mean, we haven't gone ahead and sort of named the dude. I don't think we want to step up to that level of controversy. For us, the really important thing is we would love the court to decide that maybe this is something that they should care about. And that's the bigger goal, right? You have 16, well, now I guess 15 people rotting in prison. There are other cases. There are other victims that have not been publicly reported. There's more monitoring going on that we have.
But is this a case of some rogue bad apple police officer has decided to plant a bunch of evidence? Or is this a case of actually this is the policy of the government in India to do this with people who make enough trouble? Because you were saying there's a nuclear explosion, you're saying like there's like going to be repercussions. The most likely scenario is there's going to be nothing, right?
To me, it's a nuclear explosion from the threat intel researcher perspective, where I'm like, what the hell is going to happen? As the sort of groundswell of how people digest this. I'm not saying something's going to happen. I think in most cases, nothing happens, but I do hold out that little bit of hope that something does happen. That said, I'm not ready to decide on whether it's a rogue element or whether it's that region police or whether it's the whole government. The thing that bugs me in this situation is, fine, like you could say maybe it's the cops, maybe they did whatever on their own, but then when you look at the courts, they're successively refusing, like different judges just keep refusing to weigh in on the case, and they're passing this thing as like this game of hot potato where nobody wants to deal with it. I think that entails a greater weight within the judicial and general governmental system that is not just two cops, right?
Right. That suggests that like not only is it policy, it's like policy from someone high up enough that you don't want to kill your career by getting involved with it.
I mean, I don't want to speculate on that front, but I mean, clearly members of the judicial system are not dying to run into this burning building to set this straight. I don't know what the hell's going on.
And with that, we are out of time. So yeah, I know you were just about to follow up with the guy's name. And
I was just about to say I'll get it.
Sorry to cut you off there. We don't have time for that, Jags. I know we want to put him on blast, but unfortunately, as it is, we're out of time. We're going to have to call it. So thank you for everyone that tuned in and is watching this. Once again, we love you to like and subscribe and ring the bell and all that stuff. We are trying to transition into YouTube influencers. So, you know, this really helps. This is how we pay the bills. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.